They say that a single voice can carry weight and have power. But where can you turn when no one is listening to your cries for help? Imagine that multiple industries have specifically targeted your town's water resources and have been polluting the source because they know that the pushback from your community won't be as strong as others. You contact your governmental environmental agency, hoping, praying even, that they'll use their power to bring justice to your community. But after numerous complaints and no definite answer, you begin to realize that these same industries are protecting the rich, and that's when you truly begin to worry. You understand that your town doesn't have the resources to advocate against these powerful companies for change because half live below the poverty line. And what's even more frightening is that the majority of the population are considered minority groups. You question whose side the Environmental Protection Agency is actually on, because 90% of the time, the department dismisses civil rights complaints and instead decides to side with the big companies. You also wonder how your voice will be heard, and where to turn when your water source has horribly overwhelming smells and an uncontrollable fecal problem that continues to spread. The people of the city of Uniontown are enduring those very struggles. Even after they've spoken to their town officials questioning resolutions concerning local pollution, nothing has been dealt with. The town has approximately 2,300 residents, with an 84% black population and less than 10% having a bachelor's degree. What's happening in Uniontown and many other places around the U.S. is known as environmental racism. So what exactly even is environmental racism? Dr. Benjamin Franklin Chavez Jr., an African-American civil rights leader that worked alongside MLK, describes environmental racism as racial discrimination in environmental policymaking, the enforcement of regulations and laws, the deliberate targeting of communities of color for toxic waste facilities, the official sanctioning of the life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants in our communities, and the history of excluding people of color from leadership of the ecology movements. Another definition of environmental racism comes from Robert Bullard's writing, The Legacy of American Apartheid and Environmental Racism, where he describes it as any policy, practice, or directive that differentially affects or disadvantages, whether intended or unintended, individuals, groups, or communities based off of race or color. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. A study completed in 2015 at The Ohio State University reviewed the exposure trends for people of different socioeconomic and racial groups to compare their exposure to industrial air toxins. The dataset was created by estimating air pollution exposure through compiling the yearly fallout locations of 415 air toxins released from 17,604 different places for the years 1995 to 2004. Then the air pollution estimations were compared to census data in order to estimate the exposure trends for various different racial and socioeconomic groups. As you can see from the table, which displays the national average amount of air pollution and toxicity from 1995 to 2004 in the U.S., air pollution and toxicity levels have decreased twofold. In 1995, the national exposure average was 1.8 micrograms per cubic meter and decreased to 0.61 micrograms per cubic meter in 2004. Then, when this exact same data is illustrated with different racial groups displayed, African Americans clearly have higher exposure amounts than white and Hispanic groups. African Americans had the highest starting and ending exposure points and consistently experience the highest exposure rates each year. Additionally, they experienced a high exposure level of 2.92 micrograms per cubic meter in 1995, that later decreased to 1.01 micrograms per cubic meter in 2004. White and Hispanic groups stayed significantly below these levels, with whites' exposure range being 1.65 to 0.53 micrograms per cubic meter from 1995 to 2004, and Hispanics' exposure range being 1.71 to 0.49 micrograms per cubic meter from 1995 to 2004. Then, when the data is broken down into racial and socioeconomic groups, the low-income African American group have the highest levels of air pollution. In fact, the low-income African American group experiences approximately 2.29 times more pollution than the high-income white group, and 1.82 times more pollution than the low-income white group. Also, it's important to note that the high-income African American group experiences more air pollution than the low-income white and Hispanic groups. These injustices are real, everyone. And it's not just some liberal propaganda, but the real lives of real people that are being threatened. So understanding that these issues exist is great, but it's only half the battle. Now it's time to actually do something about it. Our very own Notre Dame is surrounded by a high population of minority groups affected by environmental racism and injustice every day. But how many of you in this class of environmental engineers and environmentally focused people have even considered this to be an issue? That in itself is a huge problem when our own inaction is to the detriment of marginalized women, men, and children. So what can we do? Well, here's a few steps to help get started on the path for environmental justice advocacy. Listen up, speak up, show up, and vote informed. Each and every person in this classroom is blessed with a pair of ears, a voice, arms and legs, and a mind. Listen to the stories and struggles of those neglected by our society and negatively affected by vitriolic policy and actions regarding the environment. Take a step out of your own comfort zone to interact with members of our South Bend community and gain a perspective outside of your own. Then, be vocal about these issues on our campus. Ask questions about why you don't hear of environmental racism and injustice at ND at all. Challenge your peers, administrators, and faculty to step out of their own intellectual comfort zones and use their privileges, white, educational, socioeconomic, to change lives, not be complacent in your own comfort. But as they say, talk is cheap. So attend conventions and climate summits to be better informed on climate issues, as well as have some sort of platform to make your voice heard. Meet other people that have the same values and viewpoints as your own. There's no better motivator than a kindred spirit. And using all this knowledge and passion, vote for local and federal representatives that are concerned with environmental reform and genuinely emphasize the needs of those that our society neglects the most. Hopefully, it's no big secret that white privilege exists on this campus. Use that societal power combined with a strong open mind to enrich others without those same societally embellished advantages. We all, as ND students, have just so much power to do good for others. So together, let's open our eyes, take a step in the right direction, and make change a reality.